$200 for a dead Aston Martin, the auctioneer said, and the room laughed like the car could still feel shame. The old coupe sat beneath the white lights of Whitmore Classic Auctions with a chain hooked to its front axle, its rear tires frozen, its silver paint buried under dust so thick it looked gray as fireplace ash. One headlight was cracked. The windshield carried a long pale scar from corner to corner. The leather seats inside had split open with age, and the proud winged badge on the hood was almost hidden beneath fingerprints, rain spots, and neglect. To the men in tailored jackets holding bitter paddles worth more than most families' cars, it was not history. It was not beauty. It was a joke with 4 flat tires. Near the front row, Grant Holloway leaned back in his chair, polished shoes crossed at the ankle, a smile curling under his silver mustache. "Sell it for parts," he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Or bury it." A few people chuckled. Then more. Then the laughter rolled through the room, bouncing off glass display cases and marble floors until even the young staff members lowered their eyes to hide their smiles. Clara Whitmore stood at the auction podium with perfect posture, one hand resting on the file folder, her expression calm but tired. She had sold Ferraris that drew standing ovations, Porsches that made grown men whisper, and Bentleys with glove boxes cleaner than hospital rooms. But this Aston Martin had arrived with no clean papers, no working engine, no glamour left to defend itself. All she had was a lot number, a rust-stained transport receipt, and a room full of wealthy men eager to laugh at something that had fallen beneath them. "Opening bid is $5,000, Clara said. Silence. $2,000. More silence. Someone coughed. Someone muttered, "Scrap yard." The auctioneer beside her lowered his voice. $500. Nothing. That was when Ethan Walker shifted near the back wall. He did not look like a collector. His brown work jacket was faded at the elbows, his boots carried dried mud, and there was a thin black line of engine grease beneath one fingernail he had missed that morning. Beside him stood his 9-year-old daughter, Lily, holding a paper cup of lemonade with both hands, her blonde hair tucked behind one ear, her eyes fixed on the wounded car as if everyone else in the room had misunderstood it. "Daddy," she whispered, "why are they laughing?" Ethan did not answer right away. He studied the hood line, the slope of the roof, the tired angle of the front grille, and something in his face changed so slightly that only Lily saw it. The auctioneer sighed. $200. Final chance. Grant Holloway laughed again. "That's generous." Ethan raised his bitter card. The room turned. Clara blinked. Grant smiled wider. And somewhere beneath dust, silence, and 30 years of being forgotten, the dead Aston Martin had just been heard. The laughter did not stop when Ethan lowered his bitter card. It only changed shape, becoming quieter, sharper, the kind of laughter people use when they want a man to know exactly where they believe he belongs. Clara Whitmore looked down at the sales sheet, then back at him, her professional smile holding steady by discipline alone. "Sir," she said, carefully, "you understand this vehicle is sold as is. No warranty, no verified restoration history, no guarantee that the engine can ever be made operational." Ethan nodded once. "I understand." Grant Holloway turned in his chair, studying Ethan as if he were another damaged item that had rolled in by mistake. "You run a museum for lost causes, friend?" A few people smiled. Ethan did not. Lily slipped her small hand into his, and he gave it one gentle squeeze, enough to tell her that shame was not something they had to pick up just because someone threw it at their feet. "Payment is due today," Clara added. "Transport is your responsibility." "Yes, ma'am," Ethan said. His voice was low, calm, and plain, but it carried in the room because he did not decorate it with fear. Grant chuckled. "Let me guess. You are going to tow it behind a lawn mower?" Ethan looked at him for the first time. Not angrily. Not proudly. Just long enough for the room to feel the weight of a man who had learned not every insult deserved oxygen. "No, sir," Ethan said. I brought a truck. The paperwork took 20 minutes. The humiliation took longer. Men who had spent fortunes on polished machines stood near the exit pretending not to stare while Ethan counted out the deposit from a folded envelope. Clara noticed the bills were not crisp. They were grocery money, gas money, saved money. Money that had probably been measured against school lunches, utility bills, and the little emergencies life throws at people who cannot afford one more thing to break. For a second, something in her face softened, but she pushed it away. In her world, sentiment ruined judgment. Outside, the late afternoon air carried the smell of rain on warm pavement. Ethan backed his old blue Ford pickup toward the loading dock while the Aston Martin waited at the edge of the ramp, crooked and silent. One of the handlers shook his head. "You sure this is worth the trouble?" Ethan fastened the tow straps himself, checking each hook twice. Most things are not worth much until somebody cares enough to look closer. Lily climbed into the passenger seat and watched the car through the side mirror. Its cracked windshield caught the orange light of sunset, and for one brief moment it looked less like junk and more like something trying to remember how to shine. As they pulled away from Whitmore Classic Auctions, Grant Holloway stood beneath the awning with his hands in his pockets, smiling like he had just watched a fool carry home his own punishment. Clara stood a few feet behind him, silent. She should have felt relieved to be rid of the car. Instead, she watched Ethan's truck disappear onto the county road, the wounded Aston Martin swaying behind it like a secret being dragged back into the world. "Daddy," Lily asked softly, "did we make a mistake?" Ethan kept both hands on the wheel. The truck rattled over a rough patch of asphalt. In the mirror, he saw the old car following them through the fading light. "Maybe," he said. Then, after a quiet mile, he added, "But sometimes, sweetheart, people laugh because they cannot hear what something used to be." Lily turned toward the rear window and smiled at the car as if it had hurt him. By the time they reached the small garage behind their rented house, the sun had dropped behind the maple trees, and the first rain began tapping the hood of the Aston Martin like fingertips asking to be let in. The courtroom settled into a colder kind of quiet, the kind that did not forgive easily and did not forget what it had just witnessed. Logan Carter stood at his small table with both hands resting flat on the worn wood, his military jacket still damp at the collar from the morning rain, his eyes lowered like a man praying without moving his lips. Across the aisle, Assistant District Attorney Mark Keegan shuffled his papers louder than necessary, trying to bring back the confidence that had slipped from his voice. Judge Isabella Reeves watched him from behind the bench, her pen paused above her yellow pad. She had seen men panic in court. She had seen men perform. But Logan did neither. He simply waited. "The state calls Mrs. Margaret Thompson," Keegan announced. An elderly woman rose from the second row, thin, silver-haired, wrapped in a navy cardigan that looked too light for the storm outside. She walked slowly to the witness stand, one hand gripping the rail, the other clutching a small tissue. Logan looked at her only once, and something gentle crossed his face. Not fear. Not anger. Recognition. "Mrs. Thompson," Keegan said, softening his tone for the jury, "is this the man you saw near your truck that evening?" She glanced toward Logan. Her lips trembled. "Yes," she whispered. Keegan nodded with satisfaction. "And did you give him permission to enter your vehicle?" "No." A few people in the gallery shifted. Judge Reeves leaned back, but her eyes did not leave Logan. Keegan turned slightly, letting the answer breathe in the room. No further questions. Then Logan rose. He did not rush toward the witness stand. He moved with the careful respect of someone approaching a frightened animal, or a grieving mother, or the truth itself. "Mrs. Thompson," he said quietly, "do you remember calling roadside assistance that night?" She blinked. "I called someone. My phone was dying." "Do you remember telling the dispatcher your grandson's insulin bag was locked inside the truck?" Keegan's head snapped up. Objection. Relevance. Logan did not look away from Mrs. Thompson. Judge Reeves narrowed her eyes. Overruled for now. Answer the question. Mrs. Thompson's tissue tightened in her hand. Yes, she said. My grandson was at my apartment. He needed it. The courtroom changed again. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough for every breath to become careful. Logan reached into his folder and lifted one page. Do you remember a man arriving before the officer? She stared at him, and the shame in her eyes arrived before the words did. Yes. Did that man break into your truck? No. Did he try to steal it? Her voice cracked. No. He was helping me. Keegan stood halfway. Mrs. Thompson, you were confused that night. She turned toward him, suddenly steadier. I was scared, not confused. Logan lowered the page. He had not raised his voice once. He had not accused anyone. He had only opened a door, and through it stepped the truth, quiet as grace. Judge Reeves put her pen down. For the first time all morning, the bench seemed less like a throne and more like a burden. Logan asked one final question. Mrs. Thompson, when the officer arrived, what was I doing? The old woman looked at the jury, then at the judge, then back at the man she had failed to defend. You were trying to get my grandson's medicine before it was too late. No one laughed now. No one smirked. Even the rain against the courthouse windows seemed to soften, as if the whole building had learned respect at once. Keegan's polished confidence did not disappear all at once. Pride rarely falls like a building. It cracks first, quietly, behind the smile. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and walked back toward the evidence table as if the last answer had been a small inconvenience, not a door swinging open in front of the jury. Your Honor, he said, the state maintains that even if Mr. Carter claims he was helping, his behavior afterward remains deeply suspicious. Judge Reeves looked down at him over the rim of her glasses. Be specific, counselor. Keegan lifted the sealed bag containing the cracked dash camera. The device was damaged. Its internal memory was wiped. That does not happen. Because a man is being kind. Logan stood still. Mrs. Thompson lowered her eyes. The jurors shifted again, caught between two stories, one loud and one quiet. Keegan turned toward Logan with a thin smile. So let us ask the simple question. Why would an innocent man run? A murmur passed through the back row. Logan did not answer. Not yet. He looked toward the gallery, where a little girl with brown hair sat beside a court-appointed family advocate. His daughter, Maisie, 9 years old, wearing a yellow sweater with one sleeve slightly stretched from nervous fingers. She had not spoken since entering the courthouse. She just watched her father with eyes too serious for a child. Judge Reeves followed Logan's glance, and something in her face softened for half a second before duty pulled it back. Mr. Carter, she said, you may respond. Logan stepped forward, but only one pace. I ran because my daughter was waiting alone outside Edgewater Apartments. Keegan frowned. Alone? In my truck, Logan said. I had parked 2 spaces down. I was delivering groceries to Mrs. Thompson after her neighbor called me. When she realized the insulin bag was locked inside her truck, I tried to help. Then Officer Daniels shouted. I turned and saw my daughter step out because she was scared. The room grew still, the way a church grows still after a confession. Logan's voice stayed low. I did not run from the officer. I ran toward my child. Keegan's mouth opened, then closed. That is convenient. Logan nodded once, as if he had expected cruelty to dress itself as logic. Truth often sounds inconvenient to people who have already chosen their ending. Judge Reeves looked sharply at him, but she did not correct him. The fluorescent lights hummed above the bench. Rain tapped the courthouse windows in soft, uneven rhythms. For a moment, the whole room seemed balanced on the narrow edge between law and grace. Then Logan reached into his folder again. There is a second camera, he said. Keegan froze. What camera? Logan turned to the judge. A building entrance camera across the lot. It faces the handicap parking spaces and the east sidewalk. I requested the footage 3 times. It was never included in discovery. Judge Reeves sat straighter. Counselor. Keegan's face tightened. I am not aware of that footage. From the witness stand, Mrs. Thompson whispered, the pharmacy van has one too. Every head turned. It was parked by the curb, she continued. The driver helped me call for help. He said his camera was always recording. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy with accountability. Judge Reeves removed her glasses and set them down with careful precision. We will recess for 20 minutes, she said. And when we return, I expect every available recording from that parking lot to be produced. Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of thunder behind closed doors. Keegan stared at the floor. Logan returned to his table and looked at Maisie. She lifted one small hand, barely a wave. He gave her the faintest smile, and in that quiet exchange, the courtroom saw what dignity looked like when it had nothing left to prove. The recess did not feel like a break. It felt like the courthouse itself was holding its breath. In the hallway outside courtroom 7B, people spoke in low voices, their whispers sliding along the marble walls like cold air under a door. Keegan stood near the vending machines with his phone pressed to his ear, his polished shoes planted hard, his smile gone. Find out who has that footage, he said. Now. Logan sat alone on a wooden bench beneath a framed photograph of the county courthouse from 1968. His hands were folded. His back was straight. Maisie sat beside him, close enough that her shoulder touched his sleeve, but not so close that anyone would call it fear. She held a small notebook in her lap, the corners bent from being carried everywhere. Logan looked down at her. You doing okay, sweetheart? Maisie nodded once. You do not have to be brave for me, he said softly. She looked up at him, and for a moment her eyes filled with all the words she did not say. He understood anyway. That was fatherhood sometimes, not answers, not speeches, just listening to silence until it trusted you. Across the hall, Judge Isabella Reeves stepped out of her chambers with a paper cup of coffee. Untouched in her hand. She had meant to review motions. Instead, she had watched Logan and his daughter through the narrow window in her door. Not as a judge. As a woman who suddenly remembered being 10 years old, sitting outside a courtroom while grown people decided what kind of man her father was. Her father had been a public defender in Fresno, underpaid, overworked, mocked by men who mistook compassion for weakness. He used to say, Isabella, the law without humility becomes a weapon with polished shoes. She had not thought of that sentence in years. Then Keegan's voice cut through the hallway. Mr. Carter. Logan looked up. Keegan approached with a folder tucked under his arm, trying to recover his courtroom rhythm. You understand this footage may not help you. Logan stood slowly. Then show it. It may show things out of context. Then let the jury see the context. Keegan's jaw tightened. You always talk like you are above everyone else. Logan's eyes stayed calm. No. I talk like a man who has spent years being spoken down to. The words landed quietly, but even the clerk at the water fountain stopped moving. Judge Reeves heard them too. She looked at Logan, then at Keegan, and something like shame moved behind her eyes. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors. All rise. 20 minutes had passed, but the room they returned to was not the same room they had left. The laughter was dead. The arrogance was thinner. The truth had taken a seat and would not be removed. Judge Reeves resumed the bench and looked directly at Keegan. Counselor, do you have the footage? Keegan swallowed. Your Honor, we obtained a copy from the pharmacy van. The quality is limited. Play it. No one moved for a second. Then the clerk dimmed the lights. The monitor flickered blue, then gray, then opened onto a rainy parking lot under a buzzing street lamp. There was Mrs. Thompson's black Silverado. There was Logan, not crouching like a thief, but standing beside an elderly woman, listening as she pointed frantically toward the locked cab. There was the pharmacy driver holding a phone. There was Maisie inside Logan's old truck, visible through the windshield, small and waiting. Then Officer Daniels entered the frame. He pointed. Logan turned. Maisie opened the passenger door, startled by the shouting. And Logan ran, not away from justice, but toward his child. The courtroom fell into a silence so complete that the hum of the projector sounded like a verdict before the verdict. Judge Reeves did not speak immediately. She watched the final seconds of the footage replay in her mind, not as an image on a screen, but as a moral weight pressing against the room. Logan running toward Maisie. Mrs. Thompson reaching toward the truck. Officer Daniels moving too quickly on an assumption. Keegan standing now with his hands at his sides, looking smaller than his suit had promised. The clerk brought the lights back up, and for a moment everyone blinked as if daylight itself had become uncomfortable. "Counselor," Judge Reeves said, her voice quiet, "why was this footage not reviewed before charges were filed?" Keegan lifted his chin, but the answer did not come with confidence. "Your Honor, the initial report indicated the pharmacy van had already left before the incident escalated." "That was not my question." The room tightened. Keegan swallowed. "It appears the report was incomplete." Logan remained standing at his table. He did not smile. He did not turn toward the jury for sympathy. He simply looked at the screen, where the frozen image of his daughter stepping from the truck still hovered like a wound the court could finally see. Judge Reeves turned to Officer Daniels, who sat stiffly in the witness area. "Officer Daniels, did you ask Mr. Carter why he ran?" Daniels shifted. He refused to answer at the scene. Logan's voice entered softly. "I said my daughter." Daniels looked down. "I did not hear that clearly. Did you write that in your report?" Judge Reeves asked. The officer hesitated. "No, Your Honor." 3 short answers. 1 long silence. It was the kind of silence that separates mistake from pride, confusion from carelessness, authority from humility. Mrs. Thompson began to cry quietly, pressing the tissue to her mouth. Maisie reached for Logan's sleeve without standing. He covered her hand with his, not to comfort himself, but to tell her that the storm was passing. Keegan tried once more. "Your Honor, the state still has concerns regarding the damaged dash camera." Logan looked at him then, not with anger, but with the tired sadness of a man watching someone choose the wrong road again. "May I address that?" Judge Reeves nodded. Logan lifted another page from his folder. Mrs. Thompson's grandson's insulin bag was on the front passenger floor. When I opened the door with the emergency tool from the pharmacy driver, the dash camera mount was already loose. The wire had been hanging near the glove compartment. I moved it aside so I could reach the bag. Keegan stepped forward. "And the missing memory?" Logan turned to the judge. "The camera never had a memory card inside it. The manufacturer requires one, but the slot was empty." Mrs. Thompson told the officer that night it had not worked in months. Judge Reeves looked at Mrs. Thompson. The elderly woman nodded. "My son kept saying he would fix it." The prosecutor's face lost another shade of certainty. Then the pharmacy driver, a heavy-set man in a brown jacket, stood from the back row. "Your Honor, I told the officer that too." The bailiff motioned for him to sit, but the damage had already been done. Truth had started walking on its own. Judge Reeves closed her eyes for one brief second, and when she opened them, the courtroom saw something different in her. Not softness. Responsibility. "Counselor Keegan," she said, approached the bench. He walked forward. Logan stayed where he was. The jury watched. Maisie watched. Every person in that room watched a powerful man answer for what a quiet man had endured. After a low exchange, Judge Reeves leaned back and spoke clearly. The court will allow the state 5 minutes to decide whether it intends to proceed on evidence now visibly contradicted by the record. Keegan returned to his table, but he no longer paced. He no longer performed. He stared at his files as if they had betrayed him, when the truth was that they had only revealed what he refused to see. Logan bowed his head. In that small motion, there was no victory dance, no bitterness, no hunger to humiliate. There was only dignity, steady and unshaken, standing where accusation had tried to bury it. Keegan asked for 5 minutes, but 5 minutes can become a mirror when the truth is standing close enough. He bent over the prosecutor's table with 2 assistants whispering beside him, their voices low, their folders open, their confidence scattered across the polished wood like loose papers after a storm. Judge Reeves watched from the bench without expression. Logan watched no one. He looked down at Maisie's hand resting against his sleeve, small and warm and trembling just enough for him to feel it. "Daddy," she whispered, so softly that only he heard it. His breath caught. It was the first word she had spoken in that courtroom, and it was not fear that brought it out. It was trust. Logan leaned closer. "I am right here." Maisie nodded, but her eyes stayed on Keegan. Children understand more than adults hope they do. They know when a room has judged their parent. They know when a name has been dragged through mud. They know when quiet dignity costs more than shouting ever could. At the prosecution table, Keegan straightened at last. His jaw was tight, his face pale under the fluorescent lights. "Your Honor," he said, "the state requests a brief continuance to review newly discovered evidence." The words sounded proper, but they landed wrong. Judge Reeves tilted her head. "Newly discovered by whom, Counselor?" Keegan blinked. "Your Honor. The pharmacy footage was available. Mrs. Thompson was available. The witness statement regarding the insulin was available. The non-functioning dash camera was knowable. So I will ask again. Newly discovered by whom?" The courtroom held still. Keegan swallowed. "By the state, Your Honor." Judge Reeves let the silence stretch one heartbeat longer. "That is not an answer. That is an admission." A soft breath moved through the jury box. Not laughter. Not shock. Something closer to awakening. Logan lowered his eyes, refusing even now to feed on another man's embarrassment. That was the difference between pride and character. Pride needs an audience. Character can stand alone. Judge Reeves turned to the jury, then back to Keegan. "This court will not permit a citizen, any citizen, to be pressed through a trial built on shortcuts and assumptions because the state finds humility inconvenient." Keegan's assistant whispered again, but he raised one hand to stop her. For the first time, his voice lost its shine. "Your Honor, the state moves to dismiss counts 1 and 3. Logan closed his eyes. Maisie gripped his sleeve tighter. But Judge Reeves did not move on quickly. "And count 2. Keegan looked toward Officer Daniels, then toward the frozen image still visible on the monitor. "The state moves to dismiss count 2 as well." The gavel did not fall yet. The room did not erupt. Real justice, when it finally arrives, often comes softly, because it knows how long the innocent have already suffered. Judge Reeves looked at Logan Carter, the man she had mocked before she understood him, the father she had nearly allowed the room to reduce into a file number. "Mr. Carter," she said, and her voice changed, not in weakness, but in respect, "all charges against you are dismissed." Maisie covered her mouth with both hands. Mrs. Thompson began to cry openly now. The old veteran in the back row removed his cap and bowed his head. Logan did not celebrate. He simply placed one hand over his heart and nodded once to the bench. "Thank you, Your Honor." Those 4 words carried no bitterness. That was what humbled the room most. Not the evidence. Not the dismissal. Not Keegan's defeat. It was the grace of a man who had every right to be angry and chose instead to remain whole. And in that grace, Judge Isabella Reeves felt the full weight of her own first words to him return like a lesson she should have learned long ago. The gavel finally came down, not loud, not dramatic, but final enough to loosen every breath in courtroom 7B. Case dismissed. 2 words the law said plainly, yet to Logan Carter they carried the weight of every mile he had walked beneath suspicion, every job application quietly denied, every neighbor who looked away at the grocery store, every night Maisie had asked without asking why people whispered when they passed. Judge Reeves rose from the bench, and the room followed, but Logan stayed still for 1 second longer, as if his body needed permission to believe what his ears had heard. Then he turned to his daughter. Maisie stood and stepped into him, wrapping both arms around his waist. He bent down, holding her with the careful tenderness of a man who knew children remember how they are held after storms. "Are we going home?" she asked. Logan closed his eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. We are going home." Across the aisle, Keegan gathered his files in silence. No sharp remark. No polished grin. No lecture about law and order. Just paper sliding into a leather case and the hollow sound of pride learning how heavy it feels when no one claps for it. Mrs. Thompson approached Logan slowly, her cardigan trembling at the sleeves. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I should have spoken sooner." Logan looked at her, and the room seemed to lean in. This was the moment some people wanted anger. A sentence sharp enough to punish. A wound turned into a weapon. But Logan only shook his head. "You were scared." She covered her mouth. "That does not excuse it." "No," he said gently. "But it explains it. And explanations can be the first step toward redemption." Mrs. Thompson cried then, not loudly, but honestly, the way people cry when kindness meets the place where guilt has been hiding. Judge Reeves watched from near the bench, her robe still on, her hands folded in front of her. She had ruled on thousands of motions, sentenced hardened men, dismissed weak cases, corrected arrogant attorneys. Yet this quiet exchange felt more like justice than half the speeches she had heard in her career. Logan picked up his folder, thin and worn, filled with copies he had made at the public library for 10 cents a page. As he passed the prosecution table, Officer Daniels stood. His voice came out low. "Mr. Carter." Logan stopped. The officer swallowed. "I should have listened." 3 words. Not enough to erase it. Enough to begin. Logan studied him for a moment. "Next time," he said, "hear the person before you see the charge." Daniels nodded, his face lowered. No one applauded. No one needed to. The hallway outside was washed in pale afternoon light. The rain had stopped, leaving the courthouse steps slick and shining like the world had been rinsed clean. Maisie slipped her hand into Logan's. They walked toward the exit together, past reporters who had arrived too late for the truth but early enough to chase the story. "Mr. Carter, how do you feel?" one called. Logan paused at the doors. He looked at his daughter, then back at the people waiting for a sound bite. "Grateful," he said. "And tired." Then he pushed open the glass door, and sunlight touched his face for the first time that day. Behind him, Judge Isabella Reeves stood in the hallway, watching the man she had underestimated leave with nothing but his child, his dignity, and a grace that made the whole courthouse feel smaller. By the time Logan and Maisie reached the courthouse steps, the storm had moved east, leaving the sky over town washed in a thin silver light. The streets of downtown Bakersfield glistened with rainwater, and every passing car sent a soft hiss along the curb. Logan held Maisie's hand as they crossed toward his old blue pickup parked beneath a leaning sycamore tree. The truck looked tired, like him, with a dent near the rear fender and a cracked passenger mirror taped at the edge, but to Maisie it looked like rescue. She climbed inside and set her notebook on her lap. Logan sat behind the wheel but did not start the engine right away. For a while, father and daughter simply breathed. The silence was not empty anymore. It was healing. Maisie looked through the windshield at the courthouse doors. Was she wrong about you? Logan followed her gaze and saw Judge Reeves standing inside the glass, small from that distance, still watching. Yes, he said. Maisie turned to him. Are you mad? Logan rested both hands on the steering wheel. The question deserved more than a quick answer. Outside, a flag snapped gently in the damp wind. Somewhere nearby, a bus sighed at the corner. I was hurt, he said. There is a difference. Maisie thought about that. What is the difference? He looked at her with tired eyes and a patient heart. Anger wants to throw the pain back. Hurt just wants someone to understand where it came from. She nodded slowly, though some part of the answer would have to grow with her. Logan started the truck, and the engine coughed twice before settling. They drove past the courthouse, past the diner with the red awning, past the pharmacy van still parked near the curb like an accidental witness to grace. People on the sidewalk glanced at them now, some curious, some ashamed, some simply late to their own lives. Logan did not wave. He did not hide. He just drove. 10 minutes later, they pulled into the small gravel lot behind their apartment building. The place sat near the edge of town, where the sidewalks cracked and the streetlights flickered before dark. Mrs. Alvarez from downstairs was waiting near the mailboxes with a covered casserole in her hands. I saw the news alert, she said, her voice thick. Only a headline, but enough. Logan stepped out slowly. We are okay. Mrs. Alvarez looked at Maisie. Chicken and rice. Extra cheese on top. Maisie managed the smallest smile. Thank you. Then Mr. Benton from apartment 2C opened his door. Then Clara from the laundry room came out. Then the young father from across the hall stood with a box of groceries, looking embarrassed by his own kindness. One by one, people appeared, not with speeches, not with pity, but with small offerings. A meal. A carton of milk. A bag of apples. An apology too quiet to be named. Logan stood in the hallway, holding the casserole as if it weighed more than food. For weeks, these neighbors had kept distance, unsure what to believe. Now they looked at him differently. Not because the court had made him innocent, but because the truth had reminded them he had always been human. Maisie slipped her hand into his again. Daddy, she whispered, are they being nice because they feel bad? Logan looked down the hallway, at the tired faces, the open doors, the ordinary people trying to repair what silence had damaged. Maybe, he said. But sometimes feeling bad is where doing better begins. And as the evening light warmed the narrow hall, Logan Carter understood that redemption does not always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it comes in a foil-covered dish, a child's hand, and a neighbor finally brave enough to knock.